May 20, 1776, resolved that the flag of the United States be made of 13 stripes, alternate red and white. That the Union be 13 stars, white in a blue field, representing a new constellation. It represented the identity of America. A country that from the beginning declared that all men are created equal, that they are endowed by their Creator with inalienable rights, that among these are life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. Amen? Amen. Happy 4th. From where I sit in my apartment, I look out onto a view of the American flag. And it made me smile when I first saw it because as Aussies, we affectionately, and I say affectionately, like to tease our American brothers and sisters for their passionate patriotism. Because we are kind of different. We love our country, don't get me wrong. You know, I love this flag, but I didn't actually request that this one be here. As a joke, I was asking Dr. Peterson, I said, is it okay if I have the American flag next to me in the pulpit? And seeing I'm going to do that, it'd be kind of funny, or, you know, if I just had a little Australian one to put here, and in his office he's got lots of them. So that was my request. I walk in this morning. I love him. He is a good man. He went and bought me a big one. I really do love him. He's an amazing man. What a kind thing to do. So Dr. Peterson, if you are listening, thank you. But as Aussies, we don't tend to fly the flag so much. Maybe it's because we were convicts once, I'm not sure. But here you drive everywhere, especially down south. Flag, flag, flag. I had never seen so many flags in my life as I did when I arrived here. And yes, I kind of laughed a little bit. But I also respect it. And as I've lived here, as I've grown to love its citizens, you guys particularly, I have to say I'm getting fonder and fonder of this red, white and blue. But not so much as this one, because this is Australia. And definitely, I would suggest that my feelings towards this flag is nowhere near as deep as perhaps yours. You who have been born into this country, who have enjoyed its blessings, its freedom, its protection from a young age, who have pledged allegiance every morning in primary school, who have grown up with a love for all that it stands for. Or perhaps your experience with this flag is a little different to that. Maybe it's been a gift of protection to you that otherwise perhaps would not have been yours. Perhaps it literally saved your life by giving you a place of freedom to live. In exchange for destruction, perhaps it has given you the opportunity for abundance. And if that is so, I would think that your depth of feeling for it again is much deeper than mine, though with warm regard I face it. That true depth of feeling, of relationship, cannot be forced by anyone else or even engendered in one's own self. It has to come from something deeper. It comes from a deeper relationship with an allegiance to the reality that it represents. People have died for this flag, but not for just a cloth of red, white and blue colours. Something so much deeper that it represents, right? As history in this young nation unfolded, there was an attempt at replacing the government and therefore flag. But this was not successful. And so during and following the Civil War, the flag absorbed into itself the unfolding story as the nation was reborn and reunited. Where the founding fathers are the creators of the new nation, Abraham Lincoln is known to history as the Redeemer President. But even in this redemption, the flag did not change. It just grew deeper in its meaning. As Sigve Tonstad, probably one of my favourite theologians, as he put it, and I will quote a couple of times from him because the man is brilliant and he says things better than me. He says, "The redemptive event in the nation's story does not stand in opposition to what was laid down at the time of its creation. The redemptive event in the nation's story does not stand in opposition to what was laid down at the time of its creation. Lincoln does not overturn the work of his forebears. He defines it further and redeems it." Long ago, at the dawn of our history, the birth of this amazing planet was given its own flag, so to speak. It wasn't just a piece of cloth, something to hang on a pole to look regal or perhaps prove one's patriotism. It wasn't just a day where televisions had to be turned off or parents perhaps were given permission for an afternoon nap. Nor was it created as an arbitrary test of loyalty. The Sabbath was set apart as the high point of creation, embodying God's ideal and serving as the symbol of the reality that God represents. Like the flag, it belongs to and participates in an underlying reality. On an apologetic level, the Bible gives a firm foundation for both the Sabbath's endurance and intended blessing for all people. You remember, it was given right at the beginning, before sin came into the world, in a pre-fallen world. It was given right at the beginning to humanity, not one people group, but all. That is clear, at least in my reading. And then you go on further, and Isaiah even speaks of it in the world to come, new earth. Again, speaking to its endurance. The Sabbath's endurance and applicability for humanity as a whole is evident, but sadly, the gift of the Sabbath has been overshadowed by the way it has been presented by many. The gift of the Sabbath has been overshadowed by the way it's been presented by many. Rather than a day of blessing, it has been communicated as a restrictive law, a day full of do-nots. You don't do this, and you don't do that. Make sure you don't do this. But this is, when you think about it, this is not surprising, because the enemy from day dot has tried to portray our God as a God of restriction. You remember back to that story. You know, the servant comes in and he suggests, did God really say you can't eat from anything here? In other words, God's created an entire forest full of fruit trees, and he's said, you can't eat any of them. Now, that wasn't true, but that's the thought that he was putting in. He was suggesting this is the kind of God you're serving. And that thought remained. He's a God that says no. That's what it's about. He's holding out on you. The restrictive laws regarding the Sabbath have varied between cultures and time periods, which in itself is indicative of the problematic nature of the view. Like, you can go to Australia and the Sabbath is held a bit differently to how it is here. And in Europe it's probably the same. And then if you go back in time, it's different again. Go back to what Israel was like in Jesus' time, they had different laws again. Which one is correct? What is more indicative, though, much more indicative, is that Jesus challenged this framework. Jesus, God in the flesh, During his time on earth, the Jewish nation had taken these restrictions to incredible lengths, far more than I've ever seen in my day. And they used them as identity markers. If you do this, and if you definitely don't do that, then you're in. You are kosher. You are following God. And Jesus challenged this restrictive theology, communicating instead that it was a day of blessing and healing. And the gospel writers all emphasize this. They emphasize Jesus' healing ministry taking place on the Sabbath, and they didn't have to. They didn't have to tell you, was it on Tuesday or Monday? Or it was a point to them saying he did this on Sabbath. It was a big deal. It elicited strong controversy. And what is interesting, and I believe very telling, is that Jesus did not attempt to give cultural grace in this area. He did in other areas. He didn't address other things that perhaps were not part of his ideal package, but this he pushed back on. He actively opposed their theology. It was that significant to him. You remember the healing at the pool of Bethsaida of the lame man. What did he do? It was on the Sabbath, we're clearly told, and he told him to get up and walk, and then what did he tell him to do? Pick up that mat. He could have said, if he was being a little bit more culturally gracious, he could have said, well, it's not a big deal, but just come back for it later. It'll smooth things out, easy. He could have said, just leave it. What's the big deal? The man can walk now. He doesn't need his mat. But he says, pick it up, and walk. And then you have the healing of the blind man, John 9. Again, he could have healed that man just by thinking it or saying it. But what did he do? He picked up some dirt and he added some water and he stirred. It wasn't water. That's the part that makes me go, He used some, and mixed it together. And for us, our biggest reaction is, it's a bit gross, like, put it on my eyes. But for them, that was again breaking a Sabbath law. You weren't allowed to mix dough or anything on the Sabbath. It pushed back against their restrictive theology. He was making a point. Our God in the flesh. Why? Why would he do that? Because the Sabbath is hugely important. Hugely important. Never does Jesus articulate that the Sabbath is no longer necessary. Rather, he claimed lordship over it and re-established its purpose. He claimed lordship over it and he re-established its purpose. The Sabbath was made for man, not man for the Sabbath. What does that really mean? We say it, but what does it really mean? I believe we need to go back to the beginning, past Exodus, and right back to Genesis to understand its meaning. It points to the inherent worth and purpose that God has in humanity. In Genesis, we see that humanity's first experience was the Sabbath. Not a work week leading up to a well-earned rest, which I have been told at times over the years. The Sabbath tells you that you need to work 6 days, not just 5, Sunday too. It's 6. Because work is important, and work is important. That's not what I'm saying. Work is incredibly important and meaningful, but that's not what the Sabbath's about. In Genesis, humanity's first experience was the Sabbath, not a work week leading up to a well-earned rest, but a gift of life to be enjoyed with their Creator in celebration of all that He had done, not them. That is significant. That's the first thing we are given as humans. And this reality places inherent value and freedom and dignity in humanity, all humanity. Do you ever struggle with the need to prove yourself, your worth? You know, when someone asks you, how was your week? If you can't say, it was busy, I was flat out, do you feel a little bit bad? Goodness, I'm not pulling my weight in this world. What will people think? I do. There's this inner drive to prove that you are here for a worthwhile reason. It was flat out. I didn't stop. And I feel a little, that's right, I was busy. That's not God speaking, that little voice. That's the enemy. That's part of the curse. You remember? There will be this drive to work. The land will never give back properly what you're trying to get out of it. There's that innate drive. And the Sabbath pushes back on that. God did not create an army of workers, setting them to work with the promise of a reward in 6 days' time. He created sons and daughters to enjoy, to love, to be in relationship with. Talking about sons and daughters, Terry and I have a little announcement to make. Kidding. We kind of do, but not like that. We have an adoptive son 2 weeks ago. His name's Skipper. And I can't even tell you how much we love him. I didn't know it was possible that you could fall in love with a dog in such a short amount of time. That's him. And like all good parents, we take photos of everything. Sleeping here, sleeping there. This is a good shot, this is a not so good shot, but I love it. We talk about his every little thing. I'm not going to tell you in detail just what, but we do report, and it's exciting. I never knew that was possible. That's Skipper, yep. Our purpose for adopting him was the pure joy of loving him. That was it. Nothing that he could do for us at all except reciprocate that love, and that he does. He does. I've just got to tell you this one little thing. This little wiggle. Whenever I've been away, and it could be just the other room, and I come back, he looks at me and he just wiggles his whole body. It just warms my heart. Oh, in fact, I felt like a mother leaving her child when I had to go away to Loma Linda this past week. Honestly, it was just, his dad did a very good job of looking after him. But when I came back, it felt like, oh, yeah. And some of you may be saying to me right now in your heads, Cara, he's just a dog. And you would be correct, and that is my point. He is just a dog. Yet, in 2 weeks, I feel this for him. Me, selfish Cara, in my fallen state. I haven't even given birth to him. How much more does God, who created us, love us? How much more does that speak to what we are created for? Gipper actually has added a great deal of complication to our life, just saying. He came with a respiratory infection. I didn't know a dog would have one. An ear infection. Terry's been giving him drops in the morning and this at night, but you know what? Not even a problem. Love him. He's ours. You and I are supremely valued because we are his, not for anything that we can do. The fact that human time begins with the Sabbath, not a day of work, reminds us that living life in relationship with the Creator is our primary purpose. And I think God, in his foreknowledge, knew we'd need that. And it gets even better. When you look at the word rested, back there in Genesis, in Hebrew, it gives a richer meaning. And again, I go back to Ton's dad for this information. He's much smarter than me. But that word rested should probably be translated seized or desisted. He seized work. It wasn't about him slaving away and going, I just created a universe, I just need to sleep. It wasn't anything like that at all. He wasn't tired. It was about arriving. Tonstad talks about the imagery in Hebrew that this word gives is like a ship coming into harbour or a train arriving into a station. There's a sense of arrival, and there is innate relationship in this word that comes. God arrived, he seized, and we were there. Like someone you haven't seen for a long time, and that plane lands and you get to connect. That's the feeling that comes in this text. He says, what lies in the foreground of the seventh day's first mention in the Bible is God's gift, not human obligation. Where the seventh day is conceived as a human obligation, it might show how important God is for human life and for the meaning of existence. When, on the other hand, the seventh day is left to speak from the concise scaffolding of its first mention in the text in Genesis, the seventh day tells of the importance of human beings to God. And its primary message is not human duty, but divine commitment. Amen? Its primary message is not human duty, but divine commitment. No wonder Jesus pushed back so strongly on that theology. No wonder. They had it all wrong. The Sabbath was made for man, not man for the Sabbath. So what about the Ten Commandments? The practical laws given for Sabbath observance in the Ten Commandments were not arbitrary, but rather they served, and still do, they served a purpose. In a world where the strong often exploit the weak, the Sabbath laws ensure that all are given a time of cessation from labour, even the animals. You remember back to the story, who were the people that were given the Ten Commandments? They had been in slavery for 400 years. Work was all they knew. And not just normal work, they had been exploited for 400 years. What better way to start to teach them what the Sabbath is? By saying, you know what, on that day, you do not get to work. No longer. No. You have been abused by that. It has been all you've ever known. On the Sabbath, you will no longer work. What a gift. It was their language. That's all they knew. That's where he had to start with them. And then you look at it on another level. They had been abused all those years. From now, our perspective in psychology, what do abusers, what do those who have been abused tend to become if they're not helped? Abusers. What was likely to happen when eventually this group of people got some traction, started to work some land, some started to make money? Without some definite scaffolding, it could have really blown up badly. I'm never going to be a slave again. I'm going to make you work, you know? This was a very practical way of safeguarding this nation from that happening. They didn't have enough psychologists back there to work them through. That could have been good, but he had to just put in this. It acts as a Bill of Rights. And this theme of social justice within the Sabbath laws is further developed in the sabbatical year and the year of Jubilee, which I'm not going into, but it kind of builds in further this importance of safeguarding humanity against exploitation. And then you go to the prophets, who again talk a lot about the Sabbath. We don't tend to spend much time there. But whenever they talk about it, the theme of social justice is hand in hand. They repeatedly rebuke Israel for observing the Sabbath without having any concern for the poor and oppressed. In Amos, you have him talking about them waiting for the setting of the sun in order to be able to continue their unfair business dealings. In Isaiah chapter 1, it's explicit, stating that God hates their Sabbath services because their hands are stained with blood. There's a verse, you may have heard it if you grew up in our church. It's often been used over the years to discourage fun activities on Sabbath. Isaiah 58:13. If you keep your feet from breaking the Sabbath and from doing as you please, swimming, surfing, walking's okay, doing as you please on my Sabbath. I'm not being rude, but it has been used like that over the years. When read in context, actually has nothing to do with that. And I credit Professor Carl Cosart, our president of the Adventist Theological Society, for this. He did a brilliant sermon on it, and I went, oh, that makes so much more sense. So, just in a very brief thing, he did a whole sermon. You've got the Hebrew language, and I'm sure you would have heard about this. In their language structure, they use couplets and triplets to emphasize meaning. You see it in verse 1 of Isaiah 58. Shout aloud, don't hold back, raise your voice like a trumpet, declare to my people, saying the same thing repeatedly, right? Just in different ways, emphasizing the point. Well, that's how you get to understand what doing your own will is. Or we'll get to that. Doing as you please. So in Isaiah 58, check this out. On the day of your fasting, you do as you please, and exploit all your workers. Your fasting ends in quarreling and strife, and in striking each other with wicked fists. It gives some clarification there. That's what doing as you please means. And if you continue to read that chapter, it's on that topic the whole way through. It's all about the exploitation that was happening over and over again. And so then you read all of that, and it comes back to it. Isaiah is summing up. And then he says, if you keep your feet from breaking the Sabbath and from doing as you please on my holy day, if you call the Sabbath a delight and the Lord's holy day honorable, and if you honor it by not going your own way and not doing as you please or speaking idle words, he's coming back to what he started with. Stop the exploitation. Then you can enjoy the Sabbath. The Sabbath points to the inherent value that God has placed in all human beings. And as Sabbath keepers, along with understanding our own value, our own worth through enjoying the Sabbath, we are also called to call out that value and dignity in others. That is part of it. And you can't have one without the other, according to the prophets. As Sabbath keepers, we are called to champion the cause of the oppressed. That's part of it, because all people have worth. The Sabbath tells us that. Now, there could be a concern that without the emphasis being on strong and clear restrictions, that the Sabbath day would lose its meaning and purpose and holiness. But this is really not the case. When in true relationship with the divine, when in a loving relationship with our Creator, the purpose of enjoying His presence will be real and meaningful, so much so that a person will treasure it. It won't have to be forced. However, if a person is not in true relationship with God, then they'll probably treat the day like any other, and that would make sense. Why would they make it special? However, if that same person who really didn't understand God's love, who wasn't in relationship with God, if they kept the Sabbath, the rules of it, it wouldn't be any different. It still wouldn't be holy, because that's not the point of the Sabbath. It cannot be truly communicated or observed devoid of authentic relationship with God. It's just not possible. It cannot be communicated or observed devoid of authentic relationship with God. Just doesn't work. July 4 coming up is a special day for Terry and I. It's not just, America's day, but it's our day. It's the day he asked me to marry him last year. So we're going to do something special. But even more special to us is January 19. That's our wedding anniversary. It's a day that I really hope he remembers, and I'm sure he hopes I remember too. No pressure. Along with our date nights, we have weekly date nights. And on those nights, we carve out time and we commit to spending that time with each other because it reminds each other that of our love and develops our relationship. If the day after we got married, Terry had suddenly said to me, "Well, wife, now that you're my wife, Thursday nights are our date night. And so on that day, you cannot have your mobile phone on. You must always have 3 hours starting at 6 o'clock through to 9 o'clock to spend time with me. We will go and have dinner at a very expensive restaurant, and then we will finish it with a movie afterwards. That's how it goes because you are my wife. That's the law. Because I love you." Just wouldn't have flown as well as our usual date nights go, It would have changed the whole feel. May have gone through the same motions, but it really wouldn't have been a date night at all. In fact, it probably would have divided us more than brought us together, even if I had obeyed, That's the Sabbath. That's the difference between the law and the relationship. And it really doesn't work one way. Force doesn't engender trust, doesn't engender relationship. He doesn't do that to me. We have great date nights. And you know what? I do tend to put my phone on silent because I want to spend that time with him. But if any one of you had an emergency and really needed me, I'd check it. And I'd say to him, "It's our date night, but, this is an emergency." And he'd go, "Yeah, no worries." And I'd run out and do it. And I wouldn't be breaking our date night, would I? No. We just resume the next week. There's freedom in that. Yet, the date night is still so special and held even stronger because he'd understand. Our God, the Father, who loves us, wove into the very fabric of time itself a reminder of how valuable we are to him and his eternal commitment to us. The physical world morphs and changes, but time stands eternal. Sin could not touch time. He could have created a mountain for us, an amazing mountain, but that would have disintegrated over time. But time, that was the one thing that couldn't be touched. It is my prayer, family, that as you wake each Sabbath morning, that you are reminded, first and foremost, of his commitment to you and your incredible value to him. That is the first thing I want you to know on a Sabbath morning. May it be a day of rejoicing in that. And then, as we rejoice in that certainty that the Sabbath assures us of, may we live lives throughout the rest of the week that call out and champion that same worth in others. That is our calling, and it will be a joy to do it. Amen.